Please welcome back the director, Alex Gibney, and his editor, Michael Palmer. Are there some other people that you want to acknowledge?
Yes. A couple of other people from the team are here. Producer John Batzik is here. Executive producer Stacy Hoffman, and the second editor, Graham Butler, are all here.
So, Alex, in your career, you've covered all kinds of topics of political corruption, a lot in the U.S. and also in the Vatican with Mea Maxima Culpa and other places. What made you want to tell the story of Khodorkovsky?
Well, I was interested in telling a Russia story, particularly in the wake of the 2016 U.S. election. And it was John Batzik and P.J. Van Sandvik who had introduced me to Khodorkovsky, and it struck me. A lot of the films I've told are about power and abuse of power, and it seemed an interesting way in to tell the story of Russia through somebody who'd been at the very top and also at the very bottom, where the only power you have is the ability to kill yourself. So that seemed an interesting way in. I was introduced to Khodorkovsky, and we started.
Can you talk about what it was like filming inside of Russia? We hear a lot about the difficulties, especially for Russian journalists to operate in that country. What was it like for you?
It was a peculiar mix of feeling watched and intruded upon. I mean, we had to bring burner phones, we had to bring burner computers, all of which were wiped of like 500 different strains of malware when we got back. But then a peculiar sense that we were also at the same time flying under the radar. We shot with a Russian crew. We went, we not only hung around Moscow, but we went to far-flung places and, stayed in Airbnbs and we didn't have minders the way you have in China, for example. So I think that testifies to some extent to the misconception I had about Russia. There's an authoritarianism there, but it's kind of soft authoritarianism that I think is instructive, and that's why, in its own way, it was more chilling for me than it would have been filming in China, which I have done before also.
Michael, the work of a great editor, like the work of a great thief, erases their tracks as they go along. So what we see here just seems like the natural way this film would come together. Can you talk about what some of the challenges were to organizing this material?
Well, I think that something Alex and I discussed early on was that this is a figure who is uniquely positioned within the arc of Russian history from the end of the USSR to the present moment, given his current involvement in the politics of the country. And so trying to find a balance between telling the Russia history story and the sort of personal Khodorkovsky story, I think, required some calibration and experimentation. And so that was sort of the trick, I think, of folding those two things together. And then there's the stylistic choices, which, it's a thriller. It's kind of a gangster film, really. And that's something that I think Alex does very effectively in many of his films, is play with genre. Documentarians, I think, almost have a freedom to do that maybe fiction filmmakers don't, because it's a documentary, but if you can sort of access the salient aspects of a genre picture, you can, I think, tease things out of the story and the character. And so it was an incredibly fun film to cut, because once you have those kind of structures and constraints, you can just be free. So that was a wonderful aspect of working on the film.
Alex, can you talk about the moral ambiguity of Khodorkovsky? There are many shadowy aspects, especially early in his career when he was amassing wealth and power. You try to probe some of those. There's some places it feels like you don't fully get a clear answer. And I wonder, if you see his story as a redemption story, or how do you see it?
Well, I do see a lot of gray in the Khodorkovsky story. There's that line in the film about how gray separates into pools of black and white. We wanted to reinvest the Khodorkovsky story with the gray, and we were aided to in no small measure by the great archival research that was done, particularly coming up with that wonderful footage of Khodorkovsky with the mustache, talking about how he enjoys being greedy, which I found kind of stunning. But I think he's a peculiar kind of oligarch. In some ways, if we're making a picture about conflict, he's a kind of a Jake LaMotta figure, with whom we identify and then are also repulsed by. But also, he's a peculiar kind of oligarch in the sense that I think originally he came to capitalism as a game, as he says. For him, it was sort of fun. It was abstract, without any sense of personal or human consequence, which in its own way is kind of chilling. But I think he got a much better sense of that personal and human consequence in 10 years in a Russian prison. And I do think that coming out of that prison to say something like I learned that life is not so much about having as it is about being. It's hard to imagine, say, Donald Trump saying that. So in that sense, I believe that Khodorkovsky did change, and that he sees the world in a different light. At the same time, even today, he says things that are extremely politically incorrect or without guile, shall we say? Yeah, I got 400 million, and there's another 100 million we just got from Ireland. It's not how you would script the redemption story.
Let's take some questions. Yeah, right here. So if anyone didn't hear, he was just looking for confirmation that no funding to this film came from Khodorkovsky himself or anyone affiliated with him.
I can confirm that no funding came from, none of the 100 million from Ireland or the 400 million from elsewhere made its way into the film in any way, shape, or form. But I do find it interesting, just to your point, you made an earlier point about the fact that we're wandering around London and he's got a knapsack on his back. That's also a little un-oligarch-like. And he has a peculiar idea of personal security. He is, I would say, under some risk given the past, but he does sort of wander about like that. And yet, unfortunately, we were never fast enough, and it happened because he's uncomfortable in public. But we were approached any number of times in the street by other Russians, wanting to take selfies with him. And he does it quickly and then moves on. So it's an odd combination of things, the way he wanders around the city.
Up at the very top in the hat.
He talks about trolling some of the absurdity of the Russian government in this movie, and I was curious because you chose to include a lot of absurd moments in the archival footage that you pulled. And as he said, it's funny, but it's not funny. And I was curious if you could talk about choosing to include those and kind of strike that balance.
So you choose to include a lot of absurd moments, especially in the archival footage, and it's mentioned in the film. It's funny, but it's not funny. And if you could reflect on your choices and how to play with that humor.
We came to that through experimentation in the cutting room, and also the vibe that we got when we were in Russia. And also, to some extent, it's a Russian tradition. I think the darkness in Russia is often expressed in black humor. The novelist Nikolai Gogol, who wrote a book called Dead Souls, would be one clear example. But that's the kind of peculiar quality of this soft authoritarianism, I think. It's this kind of cruel humor, which has a deeply dark side, and yet at the same time, it's so absurd, you can't help but find it funny. So even that splashing of the water in the midst of that debate, which we showed twice, it's a moment of real fun and drama, and the guy deserved it, and he got a glass of water in his face. But it's also clearly spectacle and theater that's designed to distract everybody, not unlike the President of the United States, from far more serious problems that are taking place off camera. So I think it felt like it was the proper character of the place. I don't know. Do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, well, 2 points. One is that it's dicey to talk about the character of a nation, and I wouldn't do that. But to me, it's kind of encapsulated in there's a Shostakovich jazz waltz that we use a couple times in the film, and it's buoyant and sort of winky, but it also has a lot of pathos in it, and that to me kind of provided a guide for putting the film together at the outset. And the score that was done by Ivor Guest and Robert Logan sort of picked up on that energy, and I think underlines what you're talking about. And then I think just to pick up on a specific example of what Alex was saying is that moment when after the Skripal poisoning sequence, when you see Putin and he says, "Oh, these guys are going to do an interview. You'll see." And then the guy interviewing him says, "And they're civilians, right?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, they're civilians." It's this winky thing that is only possible because of his position of essentially supreme power. And I think that is, again, I won't say that is uniquely Russian, but I think it's folded in there.
It's becoming part of an all too popular political style, shall we say?
It's really got legs. It's a global brand.
Right here in the striped shirt.
Just a question on influence. Is there an alternate growing influence in Russia besides Putin, like in the church, other oligarchs, or other people?
So the question was about other influences in Russia, whether it's the church or other oligarchs or other forces besides Putin.
I mean, very quickly I will run out of gas as any kind of expert on Russia, but I think that, we flick at this issue a number of times in the film, which is to say that the system that Putin takes credit for destroying, the system of oligarchs, and that gives him all of his political capital, is the system that he has recreated with a new group of oligarchs. And it's a system of kind of, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, a kind of mutual favors. But at least for the moment, Putin's pretty good at playing that game. So I wouldn't say there's any particular power center that's rising up, to challenge Putin. And I think that is the issue. But there's one person we mentioned also briefly in the film, Evgeny Prigozhin, Putin's chef. He started out as a hot dog vendor and then over time was given the concession by Putin to be the caterer for the Russian army. Well, that's a pretty profitable gig. Next thing you know, he's worth a lot of money, and now maybe there's a favor that the state needs from Mr. Prigozhin, so he does a favor. It's a series of back and forth, and I think that's how things operate. But one of the interesting things is that now as the Russian economy is teetering in certain aspects, even in the country where Putin has his greatest support, you're seeing people not from the party, Putin's political party, winning, which is a kind of unusual. So there's a teeter there, and it depends to a large extent on economic fortunes.
All right. Was there a woman with a question? I haven't gotten a woman. Right there? Yes, you. So the short version of the question is, did you ever feel in danger yourself, given that you're going after Putin, who's known not to take criticism lightly?
I think there are probably other people in the world who are...
Get in line.
Yeah, exactly. who are probably more on target. And I think filmmakers, when we make films, to some extent, we hide in plain sight. And in that sense, I took a lesson from Khodorkovsky. And I think Putin, frankly, knows how to play the criticism game pretty well. So to answer your question, you always think about it, particularly when people are dropping dead who seem to be opponents of the Russian government. But at the same time, I was not overly concerned.
As a last question, you've made a couple references in this conversation, drawing comparisons to the U.S. government now, and I wonder where you think are the most meaningful lessons to take away from this story to American politics in your own country, and where we shouldn't draw such quick conclusions.
I think that where there's quite a big difference is in the rule of law, though even that is under assault, I would say, in the United States. But the rule of law in Russia really is not the rule of law at all. And you can see how dangerous that is. But there are two aspects of the way Putin rules Russia, or the way Putin maintains power in Russia, that are instructive. And we spent a lot of time in the cutting room trying to exemplify them. And one is the control of the mass media, not so much the internet, but traditional media. And you can look at whether it be Breitbart or Fox News in the United States and feel that it's not unlike NTV or Channel 1 today. And I think the other thing is this unholy alliance between the state and business, this kind of mutual favors. And writ small, you can see that in the way that our vice president goes way out of his way to spend time at the Trump golf resort in Ireland, which puts more money into Trump's pocket. But there are much more egregious examples that will prove out over time. But those two things, I think, are cautionary, not just for the United States. It was interesting opening this film in Venice, where an Italian politician, Salvini, was very much of that kind of fake news, the truth is what I say it is kind of politician. And it had a real resonance there, and you can feel it at Hungary, you can feel it to some extent in the United Kingdom. So there's a pattern, and the pattern is that power will take care of all problems, and we don't, and that is a scary prospect.
Your company, Jigsaw Productions, is always, very prolific, as I said in the introduction. Can you give us a taste of anything to come?
No. It's a secret. No, we always have something on the boil, but we've learned over time that it saps our energy if we talk too much about what's coming down the pike.
All right. Well,
thanks for asking.
We always look forward to it. I hope you get to see more documentaries this week. I want to thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to Alex Gibney and Michael Palmer.
Thanks, amigo.
Thank you.